got one of the most thoughtful, cerebral Tory MPs defecting. Today we know that they are going to scrap migrants' right to indefinite leave to stay. So essentially, if they're here for 5 years, even if they're doing some of the most low-skilled, lowly paid work, that's it. Yeah. They can stay. So can the families. And now that's going to change. Nigel Farage's reform is going to say they'll have to apply for a 5-year visa, and if they don't meet the right criteria, if they can't speak English, if they don't get paid enough, if they're not doing a skilled job,
or if they're claiming any benefits at all.
Benefits at all, yeah. Really significant, you're out.
Now, the reason for doing this is that they are saying that the Boris wave, which of course is where I think 3.8 million people came up after Brexit, when instead of reducing immigration, the government reduced the requirements to get a visa. We had this huge wave of immigration, and what they're saying is that unless we do something about this, lots of these people will become eligible for indefinite leave to remain in January and therefore start being added to the benefit system, etc. Yeah. So time is running out. But do you think it's fair, Andrew, to blame the entirety of our immigration crisis on Boris Johnson?
Well, he was Prime Minister. He was Prime Minister, and I know when he was Mayor of London, he took a different view to me about migration, because London, a great city, but needs some migrant population, particularly in the carers, for carers in hospitality. He wanted to give an amnesty to 500,000 illegal migrants in London.
Yeah.
What?
I
just thought this is nuts. He's always been an incredible liberal on these issues, and I don't think that's where the country is.
But I suppose the question is, was it deliberate? It was obviously a really ridiculous error to have the salary requirements for visas so low. I think it was £26,000, which is a long way below the median British wage, far away from this kind of high-skilled Australian model that we were promised. But nevertheless, it's a series of serious errors, but do you think he deliberately wanted to bring in 3.8 million people? Surely he would have realised that was a political disaster.
I don't think he wanted that many, but I just think there was the usual lack of attention to detail. The Tories just seem to be deaf to the cries from the country saying, oi, what's happening to our country? We voted for Brexit because we wanted control of our borders. We were sick of free movement of people. Sick of every accent you heard was from Poland or wherever in Eastern Europe. People were fed up with it. And then the Prime Minister who said, I'm going to get Brexit done, opened the floodgates. Yeah. And that's the word to use, the floodgates.
And I think COVID gave the government a false sense of security, because during COVID there was almost no immigration because there was just no movement around the world. So it looked initially like immigration had fallen a lot after Brexit. But of course, as soon as the borders were opened, the floodgates were opened. Well, to discuss this further, we're joined now by Guy Dampier, who's the senior researcher on nationhood at the Prosperity Institute. Guy, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, these plans by reform that are going to be announced this morning look remarkably similar to some of the things that you've been saying for quite some time. Talk us through the detail.
Good morning. Well, I can't say that it's necessarily true that Nigel's been reading my work, but what I can say is there is a lot of similarity. So what he's saying is, as you said, we've had 3.8 million people come in 2021 to 2023. By 2026 to 2030, about 800,000 of those will qualify for indefinite leave to remain. We could have as many as 2 million of that 3.8 million, so over half becoming eligible for ILR. And once they have indefinite leave to remain, that's it. They've got residency, they can access welfare. In fact, they've got every single right that a citizen has, pretty much, apart from the right to vote, unless they're a Commonwealth citizen, in which case they have that right as well.
Well, you say right to welfare. Do none of them already? Do some of them not already have right to welfare, Guy, even before the 5 years?
You can get right to welfare in certain situations, so you're not usually supposed to be able to access it, but certain things, usually to do with things like the Children's Act or Social Care Act, will enable you to access it as well, even if you're not officially supposed to.
And what about if they need access to the NHS? Are they paying for that?
Well, you're supposed to pay an immigration health surcharge that covers that.
But does anyone pay it?
Well, they do have to pay the surcharge in order to come to the country, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not spending more or we're not spending more on them by the NHS than they are actually paying on the surcharge. But in truth, most of them will be relatively young, so it probably won't be too much on the NHS and dealing with their relatives. But the problem is you're locking in lots and lots of people to come to this country, to stay permanently, and then to bring all of their relatives over as well. And most of these people are on very low-skilled, low-wage incomes, which means that what you're really doing is you're bringing a lot of people who are going to be fiscal costs. And if you add a lot of fiscal costs to the country, obviously what happens is taxpayers' money is going to be essentially redistributed to them, which only makes our financial crisis even worse in the long term. I mean, the number that the Reform Review I know comes from the Centre for Policy Studies. They are actually reworking out their number, but it was a very high number, around 200 billion. And the Telegraph, they did a rough one, which I think was about 80 billion. So even though we're waiting for CPS to redo their numbers, we're looking at somewhere between 80 and 200, maybe 250 billion pounds just on this.
Now, Guy, let's assume that if Reform win the next election, they're successful in changing the indefinite leave to remain rules and that they pass all the necessary legislation. They've still got the problem of how to remove people who no longer qualify to be in this country but refuse to leave. And we know from the news over the last 2 or 3 years just how difficult it is in this country to remove people who shouldn't be here. Do you hold out much hope that they will actually be able to deport people who fail to get the relevant rights under this new scheme?
Well, I think it is feasible. I think it's not feasible under the current rules, but Reform have been quite clear. They did their big press conference for Operation Restoring Justice, and they've said that they are going to remove people, and they're going to do it by cutting out the problem. The problem is the law, particularly human rights law, which makes it incredibly difficult to remove people. So by taking those decisions outside of the law, which is not a completely abnormal thing, this is how it used to be with the Home Office up until roughly around the 1970s when the modern appeals thing came in, you can simply say, look, you have no right to be in the country, you're not going to go through a court because you just don't have the right, and we are simply going to remove you. And you've got 2 choices. You can either go voluntarily, we'll pay a small sum of money, we'll sort you out, that's the cheapest and easiest option. And if you won't go, we'll do it involuntarily, and we'll send you overseas.
But if Reform win the election, isn't the Human Rights Act going to become redundant in these conversations? Because aren't they going to abolish it?
Yes, they're going to leave the ECHR, they're going to get rid of the Human Rights Act, and they're going to disapply things like the Refugee Convention 1951 for 5 years. So most of the legal blockers would be removed.
Now, of course, it's all very well if Reform do win the election in perhaps 4 years' time, but 4 years is an awful long time when we look at this ticking time bomb, really, of the numbers of people who are going to become eligible for ILR during that time. Do you think this policy platform will put pressure on the Labour government to do something similar, or is that really for the birds, the idea that they will act so radically?
Well, I hope it does put pressure on them. Labour have been talking about the financial crisis we're looking at. They have been making noises about the border. It's quite hard to see how you can claim to be serious on those if you're allowing this sort of slow-motion immigration financial car crash to happen. On the other hand, there's a lot of pressure within the Labour Party saying that they need to stand up and sort of reclaim the debate on immigration, even if it's incredibly unpopular with the country. So my suspicion is they won't do very much. The danger then is that a lot of these people will not just get ILR, they'll then be able to apply for citizenship, and a lot of them will have citizenship by the time of Reform, if they do get into government, as current polling suggests, if get into government. The question then will be what you do. And one thing that I'm not sure Reform have discussed yet, maybe they'll discuss at the press conference, is if you have gained your citizenship fraudulently, then it can be revoked. And so one issue that I've noticed, one thing I've noticed, is they're going to ask people to reapply for visas. People on ILR currently, they have to reapply for visas, and they have to redo the language tests. Now, that's important because we know that a lot of language tests are faked, and we know that language tests are incredibly low. I mean, it's B1. With B1 English, you can read a children's book, and even there, you might find some words you don't know. It's not a very high level. So if they actually reintroduce it and say, we're going to recheck your English skills, and if you can't even pass a B1 as you supposedly could, then we know you gained it fraudulently, they could revoke citizenship from some of those people and spare us some of the financial issues.